Okay, leverage, borrow to invest. Borrowing to invest is completely underutilized. Now, I don't suggest that this is for everybody, but it should be for a lot more people than actually take advantage of it. Now, when I'm talking about this, I'm talking about borrowing to invest in equity markets. It makes no sense to borrow to invest in fixed income markets. And I'm not talking about borrowing to invest in a second home. People do that. A lot of people do that. Now, the first thing to know is that you completely control the risk. And you control the risk by how much you borrow to invest. If you borrow $20,000 to invest, well, that's less risky than borrowing 40, which is less risky than borrowing 80. Now, it is funny. I have brought this up with people. Hey, consider borrowing 30,000 and placing it in your TFSA or your non-registered account. Let's say their RSP is full. And they look at me like I have three heads. They say, "Are you crazy? I know how risky that is." And then in the next breath, they will say to me, "But I am thinking about taking the $100,000 I have, going to a bank, borrowing 500,000 and purchasing a second home for 600,000." Now, I'm suggesting you borrow 30,000. You are telling me that that is too risky, but you're willing to go borrow 500,000 to invest in a second home. There is a complete disconnect there. And I won't talk about that too much more. But it is funny. And actually, you know what? I'm going to talk about this right now. I bought a home in 2002. I paid $250,000 for that home. I could sell it today for probably roughly around $800,000. This is in a great housing boom from 2002 to now, 2019. This has been one of the best periods of housing boom I'm in the GTA, at least in the GTA's history, and I believe this is somewhat experienced all over Canada. Maybe not to the same degree, but we've had, I believe, a good housing market all across Canada for the last 20 years. Well, if I add up my rate of return, it isn't that great. I added up to be around 4.5, 4.6% per year. So that's an annual return. Because I didn't just pay $250,000. I paid $250,000 plus 18 years of property tax plus 18 years of maintenance. I think that adds up to approximately $100,000 more. So I really paid $350,000 for the home. I can sell it for 8. It's 18 years later. I'm happy, but it isn't. It is a good housing market, but the rate of return isn't that impressive. Okay, so I'm not going to say anything more about that. Non-registered versus a TFSA account. The TFSA account, the room has grown to a point where it's now 65,000, somewhere in that neighborhood. And a lot of people have never invested a dime in the TFSA. If you want to borrow to invest, I'm going to go through the math a little bit here in a second, but it does make sense to place that money into a TFSA. Interest rates are low, so there is a tax benefit from borrowing to invest in a non-registered account, and that the tax benefit is the interest cost reduces your taxable income. Well, with interest rates as low as they are, that benefit is reduced a little bit. The best way to borrow to invest is to get a home equity line of credit. That is the lowest rate of interest you will pay. So, the lower the rate that you pay on borrowed money, the better. And a HELOC is likely the lowest interest rate cost that you can get. Probably the next lowest rate of interest is the rate on margin that online brokers offer. Now, that will be higher than the HELOC, but it's probably lower than a non-secured line of credit. Okay, so I'm going to go to the spreadsheet. Let's go to the spreadsheet. So this is somewhat of an example. Okay, here we have borrowing to invest, non-registered account, borrowing to invest, tax-free savings. I'm going to start with the tax-free savings. Okay, here's my assumption. You borrow to invest in the XIU. So that is BlackRock's iShare Canadian market. And it's a broad market, low-cost, passively managed fund. It doesn't track the S&P TSX 60. It tracks a broader market. There's more companies in that market. So here's what it's done. I believe it's got since 1999, I believe it's got a 19-year history, this product. And here's what it's done. Here's its average annual rate of return since inception, 7.01. That is not a great 19-year average annual return. Here is roughly the breakdown of dividends and capital appreciation. So the 7.01 is 4.2% of capital appreciation and 2.81 of dividend yield. So of that 7.01%, 4.2 has been capital appreciation and 2.8 has been dividend yield. This is a rough. Sorry, I'm just using the current dividend yield to come up with this number. This number is known, this number I'm using as the current dividend yield, and I'm deriving this number from those two. I am saying that a HELOC, the interest rate on a home equity line of credit, is around 4.5% in late 2019. The borrowed amount, $30,000. So that's what we're talking about. Borrow $30,000. Marginal tax rate, we're assuming that this person lives in Ontario and has a marginal tax rate of 29.65, 30%. So their income falls in this category, $47,000 to $77,000. That's the tax bracket. If you're going to do this in a non-registered account, it only makes sense to invest in a Canadian equity product because you get a tax break on dividends. In this tax bracket, for every dollar of dividend you get, you only pay 8.92%. Okay, so here is the non-registered account. Here's the TFSA. The TFSA is simple. You don't have to worry about any of this stuff in the TFSA. So let's look at the TFSA. You borrow $30,000. You get a dividend. You get a capital appreciation. We're assuming you reinvest the dividends. Here's what you pay in interest, 1,350. We're assuming that this HELOC line of credit interest rate never changes, just for simplicity. Okay, so you just keep on. You invest. You reinvest the dividends. You do nothing else. All you do is pay the interest. Okay, so you can see the progression of this. This is a long-term strategy. By the time you get to year 20, if it has an average annual rate of 7.01%, you've got 108,000 in there, or 116,000 in there. Look, this is the way to grow your wealth. You've turned nothing into 108,000 in 20 years. It just gets better as time goes by. Let's say 40 years pass. You've turned nothing into 421,000 or 450,000. That's what you've done. You've turned nothing into 450,000. You've paid $54,000 of interest. This kind of somewhat becomes irrelevant in a tax-free savings. It's very relevant in a non-registered account, and I'm going to look at that in a second. But hey, let's go further. Why 40 years? Why not 50 years? Let's say you're 45 years old and you live to 95, and you do nothing. You just keep doing this. You just keep paying the interest. After 50 years, you've paid $67,500 in interest, and you've got $887,000 that is going to be passed off to your heirs because you're 95. You're likely on your way out. There's no tax ramifications because this is in a tax-free savings account. Your only room that you've used is $30,000. So you can still contribute. You've just used $30,000 of TFSA contribution room. You contributed the $30,000. 50 years later, it's worth $887,000. If you're 40, And you do this for 50 years, that takes you up to 90, you pass away, and your next of kin are extremely happy you did this. Now, let's look at a non-registered account, because there's a few other things here with a non-registered account. Okay, and let me just say this. If you choose to buy a second home, the only way this makes sense to me is that you are a handyman and you love doing repairs, because you're taking on a lot of headaches. And when you buy a second home, there's no such thing as a tax-free savings account. When you sell that second home, it's just like investing in a non-registered account. So we'll go through this a little bit. 30,000, you get a dividend, capital appreciation. This becomes relatively important. We're going to say you reinvest the dividend. There's the interest cost. You get to write off that interest cost. So you save $400. That's why I have this here, the marginal tax rate. The marginal tax rate. This reduces your taxable income by $1,350. At this tax rate, you save, your tax savings is $400 per year. Tax on the dividend. Because it's a Canadian dividend, this is the rate that Canadian dividends pay. If it was a non-Canadian dividend, it would pay 29.65%. So you would want this to be in a Canadian equity product. If it's in a non-registered account, it does not matter in this account. For all intents and purposes, it doesn't matter. Okay, so let's have a look-see here. Let's go to year 20. Or sorry, year 40. Let's go to year 40. Here we go. At year 40, you have the same. Now you have some tax. So this is just $30,000 growing at 7.01%. In the non-registered account, this becomes important. You've received $168,727 of dividend. You've paid $15,000 of tax on the dividend. You've got capital appreciation of $252,189. This is fully taxable. Now, if you sell it, if you sell all of it at this point, you are boosting your taxable income by half of that amount. So let's say you have no other income in the year that you sell in year 40, you've already paid tax on the dividends because you pay tax when you receive the dividend. But this is brought into income, not the whole $252,000, half of that. Capital gain is $252,000. The taxable capital gain is half of $252,000. But still, it's a big tax bill. You are boosting your income by 126, roughly. Okay, tax on 126 is somewhere in the neighborhood of 30 or 35,000. So when you sell this, you've got to write a check to the government, whereas you don't have to in the tax-free savings. That's it. So here's your cost. You borrowed 30. It cost you $54,000 over 40 years to borrow $30,000. At some point along the way, you probably sell $30,000 of this investment and just simply pay off the loan. But that's it. Let's go to 50 years. There you go. 887. Interest cost, tax savings, tax on dividend. Now look, what's the risk here? You've borrowed $30,000. Okay, you are invested in a broad market, passively managed Canadian equity, probably an ETF. The biggest company in that ETF will be Royal Bank. The second biggest company will be TD. The top 10 companies will be all companies you've heard of. For this investment to go to zero, all these companies have to go to zero. So let's look at a realistic risk. I think from the start of 2008 to about March 2009, equity markets around the world fell roughly 50%. So let's say you bought this at exactly the wrong time. That means your $30,000 turns into $15,000. You're not happy about this, but this is not a life-changing event because you've controlled your risk by borrowing only an amount that you can deal with. In this case, $30,000. So that's how you control your risk, is what do you borrow to invest. I am going to leave it there. And I hope that helps. I think everybody should be doing. Ultimately, you are turning nothing into something very valuable. The key is to focus not on the 1 year or 5 year return. What is the 30-year return? This is a long-term play. You do it, forget about it, and look at it 30 years later. And I would be very surprised if you aren't extremely pleasantly surprised. So thank you for watching.